Have you ever wondered what happens when someone gets everything they ever wanted but loses their soul in the process? Well, let me tell you about David Johnson, a man who had billions in his bank account but was poorer than he realized. David wasn't always like this. 25 years ago, he was just another college kid with big dreams and empty pockets. He used to work at a small coffee shop near his university, making barely enough money to pay for his textbooks. Back then, he was kind to everyone. He would give free coffee to homeless people and always had a smile for his customers. His friends loved him because he was genuine and caring, but success has a funny way of changing people, and not always for the better. David's tech company started in his tiny apartment with just 2 computers and a dream. He worked 18 hours a day, survived on instant noodles, and believed he was going to change the world. And you know what? He actually did. His software made millions of people's lives easier. Companies all over the world wanted to buy his products. Within 5 years, David went from having $20 in his wallet to having $20 million in his bank account. By year 10, it was $200 million. And now, at 45 years old, he was worth over $3 billion. Sounds like a dream come true, right? Wrong. Money changed David in ways he never expected. At first, it was small things. He stopped saying thank you to store clerks. He got annoyed when his coffee took more than 2 minutes to make. He started thinking that because he could afford anything, he deserved everything immediately. Then it got worse. David began treating people like they were objects instead of human beings with feelings. If someone made a mistake around him, he would lose his temper completely. He forgot that everyone has bad days, everyone makes mistakes, and everyone deserves respect. His friends slowly stopped calling him. His family gatherings became tense and uncomfortable. Even his own employees were scared to talk to him unless they absolutely had to. David was surrounded by people all day long, but he was completely alone. The morning that changed everything started like any other terrible day in David's life. He woke up in his $15 million penthouse apartment, looking out at the city below through floor-to-ceiling windows. Most people would feel grateful for such a view, but David felt nothing except anger about his business problems. His latest deal had just fallen apart. Not because he needed the money. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But because his ego couldn't handle losing. David had spent months planning this deal, and when it didn't work out, he felt like the whole world was against him. He threw his phone across the room when his assistant called with more bad news. The expensive device hit the marble wall and shattered into pieces. David didn't care. He could buy 100 new phones without even thinking about it. Standing in his bathroom that morning, David looked at himself in the mirror. He saw an expensive haircut, perfect teeth, and a face that hadn't aged much thanks to the best skincare money could buy. But if he had looked deeper, he might have seen what everyone else saw, a man who had lost his way completely. David put on his $3,000 suit and grabbed his car keys. He owned 7 cars, but today he chose the bright red sports car that cost more than most people's houses. As he drove through the city streets, he felt like everyone and everything was moving too slowly for him. He needed somewhere to go, somewhere, to feel important again. That's when he decided to visit Romano's, his favorite restaurant. It wasn't because he was hungry. David barely ate anything anymore because stress had killed his appetite. He went there because the staff usually treated him like a king, and today he needed to feel like he was still in control of something. Romano's was the kind of place where rich people went to see and be seen. The walls were covered in dark wood. The lights were dim and fancy, and every table had fresh flowers that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. David had been going there for 3 years, always sitting at the same table, always ordering the same expensive wine. The restaurant staff knew him well. They knew he would tip big if everything went perfectly, but they also knew he could make their lives miserable if anything went wrong. Most of them had learned to be extra careful when David was around. As David's red car pulled up to the restaurant, the valet rushed over to open his door. David didn't say thank you or even look at the young man who would park his car. He just walked straight into the restaurant like he owned the place. The hostess, a young woman who had been working there for 2 years, recognized him immediately. Her smile became a little forced, because she knew David's visits could go very well or very badly with no in-between. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson," she said politely. "Your usual table is ready for you." David didn't respond. He just walked past her toward his table in the corner, the one with the best view of the entire restaurant. As he sat down, he could feel his anger still burning inside him like a fire that wouldn't go out. He looked around the restaurant and saw other people laughing, talking, and enjoying their meals. Couples were holding hands across their tables. Families were celebrating birthdays. Friends were catching up after long weeks at work. Everyone seemed happy except him, and that made David even angrier. He pulled out his new phone. His assistant had already sent him a replacement for the one he broke that morning and started reading his emails. More bad news, more problems. More people asking him for things he didn't want to give. David's jaw tightened as he read message after message. His hands clenched into fists on the white tablecloth. The couple at the next table glanced over at him nervously, sensing the dark mood radiating from his corner. That's when the waitress approached his table. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She had been working at Romano's for just 6 months, long enough to know that serving David Johnson could make or break her entire shift. What she didn't know was that David was about to have the worst outburst of his entire life, and she was about to become the target of all his anger and frustration. She also didn't know that her response would change everything, not just for David, but for everyone watching what was about to happen. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be talked about for years to come. While David sat at his corner table, burning with anger and frustration, another story was unfolding just a few feet away in the restaurant's busy kitchen. This is the story of Lisa Chen, a woman whose life was as far from David's privileged world as you could imagine. Lisa had been awake since 4 in the morning, not by choice, but because her mother had called from the hospital, scared and unable to sleep. Her mom was fighting cancer, and the treatments were expensive. So expensive that Lisa sometimes lay awake at night wondering how she would pay for everything. After calming her mother down over the phone, Lisa had gotten dressed in the dark, careful not to wake her younger brother who was sleeping on the couch. Their small apartment only had 1 bedroom, which her mother used when she was home from the hospital. Lisa slept on an air mattress in the living room, and her brother took the couch. By 5 in the morning, Lisa was at her first job, cleaning offices in the downtown business district. She would vacuum carpets, empty trash cans, and wipe down desks where people like David made decisions that affected thousands of lives. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was cleaning up after people who made more money in a day than she made in a year. Her second job started at noon. She worked as a nurse's assistant at a small clinic, helping elderly patients and learning everything she could about healthcare. This was the job she loved most because she was actually helping people, making their days a little brighter when they weren't feeling well. But it was her third job that paid the most bills, working as a waitress at Romano's. The tips were good when she served the right customers, and Lisa needed every penny she could get. Between her 3 jobs, Lisa was also taking night classes to become a registered nurse. She had been working toward this goal for 3 years now, taking 1 or 2 classes each semester, because that's all she could afford. Her teachers often told her she was one of their best students, but Lisa barely had time to celebrate her good grades. Every morning, Lisa would look at herself in the small mirror above their bathroom sink and give herself a pep talk. "You can do this," she would say quietly. "You're doing this for Mom, for your brother, and for all the patients you'll help someday." Lisa had learned to hide her tiredness behind a smile. She had learned to be kind to difficult customers because she needed their tips. She had learned to work through pain when her feet hurt from standing all day, and she had learned to stay positive even when everything seemed impossible. But Lisa had never dealt with someone like David Johnson on his worst day. As she walked toward David's table that evening, Lisa was already exhausted. She had worked at the clinic until 4 o'clock, rushed home to check on her mother, and then hurried to Romano's for her evening shift. Her feet were sore, her back ached, and she had gotten some concerning news about her mother's latest test results. However, Lisa still managed to smile as she approached David's table. She had served him before, maybe 5 or 6 times over the past few months. He was always demanding and never particularly friendly, but he tipped well, and Lisa needed those tips more than most people needed their next breath. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson," Lisa said politely, pulling out her notepad. "Can I start you with something to drink tonight?" David looked up from his phone with an expression that should have been a warning. His eyes were cold and angry, and his jaw was clenched tight. But Lisa was focused on doing her job well, not on reading the danger signs. "I want my usual wine," David said sharply. "And I want it now, not in 10 minutes like last time." Lisa nodded and smiled. "Of course, sir. I'll get that right away. Have you decided on dinner, or would you like a few more minutes?" "I'll have the risotto," David said, not looking at her. "And I want it made perfectly, no mistakes. I've had a terrible day and I don't need any more problems." Lisa wrote down his order carefully. She had been doing this job long enough to know that some customers were having bad days, and the best thing she could do was give them excellent service and stay out of their way. "Absolutely, sir. I'll make sure the kitchen knows to prepare it just the way you like it." David waved her away without another word, turning back to his phone. Lisa hurried to the bar to get his wine, then went to the kitchen to place his order. She asked the chef personally to make sure David's risotto was perfect, not because she was afraid of David, but because she took pride in her work. What Lisa didn't know was that the kitchen was having its own problems that night. One of the UE main cooks had called in sick and they were running behind on several orders. The head chef was doing his best to keep everything moving, but they were understaffed and overwhelmed. Lisa brought David his wine and some fresh bread, checking on her other tables while his food was being prepared. She served an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, helped a family with young children decide what to order, and refilled water glasses for a table of business people having a meeting over dinner. At each table, Lisa was the same person, kind, attentive, and professional. The elderly couple thanked her for remembering they preferred their water without ice. The family with children appreciated how patient she was when their youngest son couldn't decide between pasta and pizza. The business people were impressed by how quietly she refilled their glasses without interrupting their conversation. This was who Lisa really was, someone who cared about other people, even when her own life was falling apart. Meanwhile, David's anger was growing worse by the minute. He had received 3 more difficult phone calls. His lawyer had texted him about another problem with his business, and he was starting to feel like the whole world was working against him. Every time he looked around the restaurant and saw other people enjoying themselves, he felt more frustrated. In the kitchen, the chef was doing his best with David's risotto, but everything was taking longer than usual. The rice needed to be stirred constantly. The timing had to be perfect, and with one cook missing, everything was just a little bit behind schedule. Lisa checked on the order twice, and both times the chef assured her it would be ready in just a few more minutes. She went back to David's table to refill his wine glass and let him know his food was almost ready. "It'll just be another minute or two, Mr. Johnson," she said with a smile. "The chef is making sure it's perfect for you." David looked at his expensive watch and scowled. "How long does it take to make risotto? I could have cooked it myself by now." Lisa maintained her professional smile. "I understand your frustration, sir. I'll check on it again right now." As Lisa walked back toward the kitchen, she had no idea that David's patience was about to run out completely. She had no idea that all of his anger from his failed business deal, his loneliness and his frustration with life was about to explode like a volcano. She also had no idea that her response to what was about to happen would change both of their lives forever. When Lisa returned to David's table 5 minutes later with his perfectly prepared risotto, she was still smiling, still professional, still trying her best to make his evening better despite her own exhaustion and worry about her mother. David looked at the plate, then at his watch, then back at Lisa. His face was turning red, and other diners were starting to notice the tension building at his table. "This is unacceptable," David said, his voice getting louder. "I've been waiting for 25 minutes for a simple plate of risotto." Lisa felt her heart start to beat faster. She could sense that something bad was about to happen, but she tried to stay calm and professional. "I'm very sorry for the wait, Mr. Johnson. The kitchen was a little backed up tonight, but I made sure your dish was prepared exactly how you like it." That's when David exploded. His voice boomed across the restaurant as he began shouting about the service, about the wait time, about how unacceptable everything was. Other customers stopped eating and turned to stare. The hostess looked over nervously from her station by the door. Even the kitchen staff could hear the commotion. Lisa stood there, her hands beginning to shake slightly, as David's anger poured over her like a storm she never saw coming. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but nothing like this. Nothing this personal, this cruel, this publicly humiliating. What happened next would be remembered by everyone in that restaurant for the rest of their lives. The explosion that came from David's table was unlike anything the staff at Romano's had ever witnessed. His voice cut through the gentle murmur of dinner conversation like a knife through silk, and suddenly the entire restaurant fell silent except for his angry words. "This is absolutely ridiculous," David shouted, his face turning bright red as he stood up from his chair. 25 minutes for risotto? What kind of place are you people running here?" Lisa stood frozen beside his table, holding her notepad, with hands that had started to tremble. She had never experienced anything like this in all her months working at Romano's. Sure, she had dealt with impatient customers before, people who were having bad days or who were naturally demanding. But this was different. This felt personal and mean in a way that made her stomach twist with anxiety. Around the restaurant, other diners had stopped eating completely. Forks hung in midair as people turned to stare at the scene unfolding at David's corner table. The elderly couple celebrating their anniversary looked shocked and uncomfortable. The family with young children was trying to distract their kids from the shouting. Even the business people had stopped their meeting to watch what was happening. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Johnson," Lisa said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "The kitchen was backed up tonight because—" "I don't want to hear excuses," David interrupted, his voice getting even louder. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know how much money I spend in this place?" Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as every person in the restaurant stared at her. She could see the hostess by the front door looking worried and uncertain about what to do. She could see other waitresses peeking out from behind the bar, their faces full of sympathy and concern. "Sir, please," Lisa said, still trying to maintain her professional composure even though her heart was racing. "If there's anything I can do to make this better." "You can do your job properly," David snapped, pointing his finger at her. "This is completely unacceptable service. I've never been treated so poorly in my entire life." The irony of his statement was lost on David, but it wasn't lost on the people watching. Here was a man who had just screamed at a young woman for bringing him food that was a few minutes late, complaining about being treated poorly. Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to cry at work. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her mother's medical bills depended on the money she made here, and her brother was counting on her to keep their small family together. "I understand your frustration," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let me get my manager for you." But David wasn't finished. In fact, he was just getting started. "Your manager?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your manager should fire you for this kind of incompetent service. You're clearly not cut out for this job." Those words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She had been working 3 jobs, going to school, and taking care of her family for years. She had never been called incompetent in her life. Her teachers praised her dedication. Her other employers appreciated her hard work. Her patients at the clinic loved her gentle care. But here was this man, this stranger who knew nothing about her life or her struggles, calling her incompetent in front of a room full of people. David kept going, his anger feeding on itself like fire feeds on oxygen. "Look at you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You can't even handle a simple order without messing it up. How do you expect to succeed at anything in life if you can't do a basic job like this?" The restaurant was so quiet now that you could hear the soft jazz music playing over the sound system. Music that seemed completely out of place with the ugly scene happening at David's table. Some people had started to look away, too uncomfortable to keep watching. Others stared in fascination like they were witnessing a car accident. Lisa's manager, Robert, had finally noticed the commotion and was making his way across the restaurant. Robert was a good man who cared about his employees, but he was also terrified of losing David as a customer. David spent thousands of dollars at Romano's every month, and that kind of money was hard to replace. Robert approached the table with his hands slightly raised like he was trying to calm down a dangerous animal. "Mr. Johnson," he said in his most diplomatic voice, "I'm so sorry for any inconvenience. What can we do to make this right?" David turned his fury toward Robert, but he lowered his voice slightly. "Your waitress here has provided the worst service I've ever experienced. The food was late, she made excuses instead of apologizing properly, and she clearly doesn't understand how to treat valued customers." Lisa stood there listening to David describe her in ways that weren't true at all. She had apologized multiple times. She had explained the situation politely. She had done everything she could to make his evening better, but none of that seemed to matter to David. Robert looked torn between protecting his employee and keeping his biggest customer happy. "I'm sure Lisa didn't mean any disrespect," he said carefully. "She's actually one of our best waitresses, but if you'd prefer, I can have someone else take care of your table for the rest of the evening." "One of your best?" David scoffed. "If this is your best, I'd hate to see your worst. This young lady has no business working in a place like this. She should find a job more suited to her abilities." That was the moment when something inside Lisa began to change. She had been standing there taking David's verbal abuse, apologizing for things that weren't really her fault, trying to keep the peace because she needed this job. But hearing him suggest that she wasn't good enough to work at Romano's sparked something deep inside her. Lisa thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life while worrying about medical bills. She thought about her younger brother, who looked up to her and depended on her to keep their family together. She thought about all the patients at the clinic who smiled when she walked into their rooms because they knew she cared about them. She thought about her nursing classes, where her professors had told her she had a natural gift for helping people. She thought about all the double shifts she had worked, all the nights she had stayed up studying after working 14 hours, all the sacrifices she had made to build a better life for herself and her family. And she thought about how this man, this stranger who knew nothing about her life, was trying to make her feel small and worthless in front of a room full of people. The other diners in the restaurant were watching this scene with a mixture of horror and fascination. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable with David's behavior. A few people had their phones out, recording what was happening. Others were whispering to their dinner companions about how inappropriate David was being. At the table next to David's, an elderly gentleman was shaking his head in disgust. He had been coming to Romano's for 20 years, and he had never seen anything like this. His wife was looking at Lisa with sympathy, remembering what it was like to be young and trying to make it in the world. The family with children had asked for their check and were preparing to leave, not wanting their kids to witness any more of David's outburst. The business people were uncomfortable, recognizing that David's behavior was the kind of thing that could ruin someone's reputation if it ended up on social media. But David seemed oblivious to how his behavior was affecting everyone around him. He was so focused on his own anger and frustration that he couldn't see the looks of disapproval on people's faces. He couldn't see how his shouting was ruining other people's dinners. He couldn't see that he was making himself look terrible in front of dozens of witnesses. Robert was still trying to mediate the situation, offering to comp David's meal, offering to have the chef prepare something fresh, offering anything he could think of to calm David down. But David wasn't interested in solutions. He seemed to want to keep punishing Lisa for something that wasn't really her fault. "You know what your problem is?" David continued, pointing at Lisa again. "You people don't understand what it means to provide excellent service. You don't understand that some customers are more important than others. You don't understand that when someone like me comes into your restaurant, you need to treat them with the respect they deserve." Lisa felt something shift inside her chest. All her life, she had been taught to be polite, to be respectful, to avoid confrontation. Her mother had raised her to treat everyone with kindness, even when they didn't deserve it. Her nursing instructors had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to think before speaking, to always maintain her professionalism. But standing there, listening to David talk about how some people were more important than others, Lisa realized that sometimes staying quiet wasn't the right thing to do. Sometimes when someone was being cruel and unfair, the right thing to do was to speak up. She looked around the restaurant at all the people who were watching this scene unfold. She saw the disapproval in their eyes, the way they were looking at David with disgust and looking at her with sympathy. She realized that everyone in this room could see what was really happening here. Everyone except David. Lisa took a deep breath and did something that surprised everyone in the restaurant, including herself. Instead of apologizing again, instead of running away to cry in the bathroom, instead of letting David continue to berate her, she looked him straight in the eyes and prepared to say something that would change everything. The moment before Lisa spoke felt like the entire world had stopped moving. The restaurant was so quiet that you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. David was still standing by his table, his face red with anger, clearly expecting Lisa to apologize again or maybe even start crying. He had no idea that the young woman standing in front of him was about to say something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Lisa looked directly into David's eyes. Her hands had stopped shaking, and her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "Sir," she said quietly, but loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. "I've served senators, celebrities, and business leaders, but I've never met someone so rich on the outside yet so poor on the inside." The words hung in the air, like a bell that couldn't be unrung. David's mouth fell open. His angry expression slowly changed to one of complete shock. For the first time in years, someone had seen right through his money and power to the broken person underneath. For the first time in years, someone had told him the truth about who he had become. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Everyone was processing what they had just heard. Then, slowly, something amazing started to happen. The elderly gentleman at the table next to David's began to clap. It started as slow, deliberate applause, the kind you might hear at a graduation ceremony when someone gives a particularly meaningful speech. His weathered hands came together again and again, the sound echoing through the quiet restaurant. His wife joined him, clapping with tears in her eyes. She remembered being Lisa's age, remembered what it was like to work hard for little money while trying to build a better life. She was proud of this young woman for standing up for herself with such grace and dignity. Then the family with children started clapping. The parents had been trying to leave because they didn't want their kids to see David's ugly behavior, but now they stayed to show their support for Lisa. Even their youngest child, who didn't fully understand what was happening, clapped along with his parents. One by one, every person in Romano's began to applaud. The business people at their corner table, the young couple on their first date, the group of friends celebrating a birthday. Even some of the kitchen staff had come out to see what was happening, and they were clapping too. The applause grew, louder and stronger, filling the restaurant with a sound that was both supportive and defiant. It wasn't just applause for Lisa's brave words. It was applause for everyone who had ever been treated badly by someone who thought their money made them better than other people. David stood in the middle of it all, completely stunned. He looked around the restaurant at all these people clapping for the waitress who had just called him poor. His face went from red with anger to white with shock. His hands trembled as he realized that everyone in this room saw him as the villain in this story. And for the first time in many years, David began to see himself the way other people saw him. Meanwhile, several people had their phones out recording what was happening. Within hours, videos of Lisa's response and the restaurant's reaction would be shared thousands of times on social media. The story would spread far beyond Romano's, touching people all over the world who had their own experiences with bullies and difficult bosses. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a young woman had found the courage to speak truth to power, and a room full of strangers had supported her. Lisa herself seemed surprised by the reaction. She had expected to be fired. She had expected David to get even angrier. She had never expected the entire restaurant to burst into applause for something she said. Robert, the manager, was caught between his loyalty to his employee and his fear of losing David as a customer. But as he looked around at all the other customers clapping and showing their support for Lisa, he realized that keeping David happy wasn't worth losing the respect of everyone else. "Lisa," Robert said, walking over to stand beside her. "That was beautifully said." More applause erupted at Robert's words. The customers appreciated seeing a manager stand up for his employee instead of just thinking about money. David looked around the restaurant one more time, seeing all these faces looking at him with disapproval and disappointment. He saw the phones recording his humiliation. He saw the disgust in people's eyes. And slowly, very slowly, he began to understand what Lisa had meant. He was rich. Incredibly, unimaginably rich. He could buy anything he wanted, go anywhere he pleased, do whatever he felt like doing. But in this moment, surrounded by people who saw him for who he really was, David felt poorer than he had ever felt in his entire life. The applause began to die down, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. People were smiling now, talking quietly among themselves about what they had just witnessed. The elderly couple was holding hands across their table, reminded of why they had fallen in love 50 years ago. The family with children was staying, for dessert after all, wanting to be part of this special moment. David slowly sank back into his chair. His legs felt weak, like they might not support him anymore. His expensive suit suddenly felt heavy and uncomfortable. His gold watch felt like it was weighing down his wrist. Lisa was still standing beside his table, but she wasn't trembling anymore. She looked calm and dignified, like someone who had just passed an important test. She wasn't gloating or acting proud of what she had said. She just looked like someone who had finally found her voice. David started to speak, then stopped. He had spent so many years talking, demanding, shouting, ordering people around. But now, when he needed words the most, he couldn't find them. Lisa waited patiently, the way she had been trained to wait for patients at the clinic when they were trying to express something difficult. David tried again, his voice much quieter than it had been all evening. "You're right." Those two simple words seemed to take enormous effort for him to say. You could see the struggle on his face, the way admitting he was wrong went against everything he had become over the past 20 years. The restaurant was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. People were listening intently, curious to see what would happen next. This was clearly a moment that would change someone's life, and they all felt privileged to witness it. David looked up at Lisa, and for the first time all evening, he really saw her. Not as a servant or an employee or someone beneath him, but as a human being with her own struggles and dreams and dignity. "I am poor," he whispered, so quietly that only Lisa and the people at nearby tables could hear him. "I have everything. Money can buy, but I've lost everything that actually matters." Lisa felt her heart soften slightly. She could see that something was breaking inside this man, something that had been hard and angry for a very long time. "You don't have to stay poor, sir," she said gently. "Not the kind of poor that really matters." David put his head in his hands. For a moment it looked like he might start crying right there in the middle of Romano's, in front of all these strangers who had just seen him at his absolute worst. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete, but everyone in the restaurant could sense that something fundamental had shifted. The angry, entitled man who had walked in that evening was gone, replaced by someone who was finally beginning to see the truth about himself. And it had all started with one sentence from a brave young woman who refused to let anyone make her feel small, no matter how much money they had in their bank account. What happened next at Romano's that evening was something nobody expected, not even Lisa herself. The angry billionaire who had stormed into the restaurant just an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone who looked completely lost and broken. David sat at his table with his head in his hands for what felt like forever. The restaurant had returned to a normal volume of conversation, but people kept glancing over at his table, curious about what would happen next. Some were recording with their phones, sensing that this story wasn't over yet. Lisa stood beside his table, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to walk away and let David deal with his own problems. After all, he had just humiliated her in front of a room full of strangers. But another part of her, the part that was studying to be a nurse, the part that had been raised to show kindness even to difficult people, felt sorry for him. She could see that David was genuinely struggling with something deeper than just anger about late food. His shoulders were shaking slightly, and she realized he might actually be crying. "Mr. Johnson," Lisa said softly, "are you okay?" David looked up at her with red, watery eyes. "No," he whispered. "I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a very long time." The honesty in his voice surprised everyone who heard it, including David himself. He hadn't admitted weakness to anyone in years. He had built his whole identity around being strong, powerful, and in control. But sitting there in Romano's, surrounded by people who had just seen him at his worst, he couldn't pretend anymore. "I don't know when I became this person," David continued, his voice still quiet but growing stronger. "I used to be different. I used to care about people. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be human." Lisa pulled out the chair across from David and sat down. This surprised everyone watching, including Robert, the manager. Most people would have walked away from someone who had just treated them so badly. But Lisa had seen enough pain in her work at the clinic to recognize when someone was truly suffering. "Money changes people," Lisa said gently, "but it doesn't have to change them forever." David looked at her with wonder, like he couldn't believe she was being kind to him after everything he had just put her through. "Why are you being nice to me? I was horrible to you. I said terrible things. I tried to get you fired." Lisa thought about her answer for a moment. "Because my mother taught me that everyone deserves a second chance. And because I've learned that the people who act the meanest are usually the ones who are hurting the most." Those words hit David like a physical blow. He thought about his own mother, who had died 5 years ago. She had been disappointed in the man he had become, though she had never said it directly. She had tried to remind him about kindness and humility, but he had been too busy making money to listen. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," David said. "She is," Lisa replied. "She's fighting cancer right now, actually. That's why I work so many jobs. Her treatments are expensive, and we don't have insurance that covers everything." David stared at Lisa in shock. Here was this young woman who was dealing with her own serious problems, working multiple jobs to pay for her mother's medical care, and she was sitting here comforting him. The contrast between her struggles and his privileged complaints made him feel even worse about his behavior. "I'm so sorry," David said, and this time he really meant it. "I'm sorry about your mother, and I'm sorry about how I treated you tonight. There's no excuse for what I did." Lisa nodded, accepting his apology. "Thank you for saying that." David reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He took out several $100 bills and placed them on the table. "This is for you," he said. "I know it doesn't make up for how I acted, but I want you to have it." Lisa looked at the money, but didn't touch it. "That's very generous, Mr. Johnson, but you don't have to do that." "Please," David said. "It would make me feel a little better about myself if you took it. Use it for your mother's treatments, or for school, or for whatever you need." Lisa hesitated, then picked up the bills. It was more money than she usually made in a month of tips, and she knew it would help with her mother's next round of treatments. "Thank you," she said simply. David stood up from his chair, still looking shaky but more determined than before. He walked over to the elderly couple who had started the applause earlier. "Excuse me," he said to them. "I wanted to apologize for ruining your evening with my behavior." The elderly man looked up at David with surprise. "Well," he said slowly, "that takes courage, son. Not many people would apologize after something like that." "I should have apologized sooner," David replied. "I should have been a better person from the start." David went around the restaurant, table by table, apologizing to everyone for disrupting their dinner. Most people accepted his apology graciously, surprised by the complete change in his demeanor. When he got to the family with children, the father initially seemed hesitant to talk to him. But David knelt down, so he was at the same level as the kids. "I'm sorry for yelling," he told the children. "That wasn't nice of me, and grown-ups shouldn't act that way." The youngest child, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, looked at David seriously. "My mommy says everyone makes mistakes," she said. "But you have to say sorry and try to do better." David smiled for the first time all evening. "Your mommy is very smart. I will try to do better." As David made his way around the restaurant, people began to see him differently. The angry, entitled man from earlier was being replaced by someone who seemed genuinely sorry and willing to change. When David returned to Lisa's table, he had one more surprise for everyone. "I want to pay for everyone's dinner tonight," he announced. "To the restaurant. It's the least I can do after disturbing your evening." The room erupted in surprised chatter. Robert, the manager, looked stunned. He had never seen anything like this in his 20 years in the restaurant business. But David wasn't finished. He turned back to Lisa. "And I want to do something else. What's your mother's name?" "Amy," Lisa replied, confused about where this was going. "Amy," David repeated. "I want to help pay for Amy's treatments. All of them, whatever she needs." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Johnson, that's too much. I can't accept something like that." "Please," David said. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me use some of it to actually help someone for once." Lisa was overwhelmed. Just an hour ago, this man had been screaming at her, trying to get her fired, making her feel worthless. Now he was offering to pay for her mother's cancer treatments. "There's one condition," David continued. "I want to start a foundation to help other families like yours. Families who are struggling with medical bills they can't afford. And I want you to help me run it." The restaurant had gone quiet again, as people listened to this incredible turn of events. "But I'm just a waitress," Lisa said. "I'm still in nursing school. I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know about helping people," David replied. "You know about kindness and compassion and treating everyone with dignity. Those are the most important qualifications." Lisa looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching this conversation. She saw hope and encouragement in their eyes. She thought about her mother, about all the other families struggling with medical bills, about all the good they could do with David's resources, and her heart for helping people. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll help you." The restaurant erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. This time it was applause for second chances, for redemption, for the possibility of change. Over the following months, David kept his promises. He paid for Amy's treatments, and she made a full recovery. He and Lisa started the foundation, which helped hundreds of families with medical expenses. Lisa finished nursing school on a scholarship from the foundation and eventually became the head of patient care at the city's largest hospital. David went to therapy and slowly learned how to reconnect with his humanity. He never became perfect. That kind of change takes time. But he became a better person, someone who used his wealth to help others, instead of just accumulating more for himself. The story of what happened at Romano's that night spread far beyond the restaurant. Videos of Lisa's response went viral, inspiring people around the world to stand up for themselves and treat others with dignity. But the most important change happened in the hearts of two people who learned that night that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. Lisa learned that she had the courage to stand up for herself, and David learned that true wealth comes from how you treat other people, not from how much money you have in the bank. And it all started with one sentence from a brave young woman who refused to let anyone make her feel small.